I found the lien notice taped to my front door on a Tuesday morning in late March, flapping against the wood like some kind of legal death sentence, and my coffee mug nearly slipped from my fingers when I saw the amount, $47,000. My name is Franklin Norris, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, for exactly 3 years, 8 months, and 12 days. I bought my modest ranch-style home with my veterans benefits after serving 2 tours overseas, and I thought I had finally found peace in this quiet neighborhood with its palm trees and manicured lawns. The HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience when I signed the papers, just another bureaucratic hurdle that came with homeownership. I paid my dues on time, kept my grass cut, and minded my own business. I never imagined that same HOA would become my personal nightmare. The document in my trembling hands claimed I owed the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association $47,000 in accumulated fines, late fees, interest charges, and legal costs. According to the notice, the HOA had already filed a lien against my property and would proceed with foreclosure proceedings if I did not pay within 30 days. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the list of alleged violations. Unauthorized paint color, improperly stored garbage bins, vehicle parked in driveway overnight, lawn maintenance violations, unapproved landscaping changes, and the list went on for 2 full pages. I stumbled back into my house and collapsed onto my couch, reading through the notice 3 more times. None of this made any sense. My house was painted the same beige color it had been when I purchased it. I always rolled my garbage bins back to the side of the house after collection day. My truck sat in my garage every night. I paid a lawn service to keep everything pristine. I had not changed a single plant in my yard since moving in. More disturbing was the claim that the HOA had sent me numerous violation notices over the past 2 years, which I had ignored. The document listed dates and certified mail tracking numbers for letters I had never received. Not a single one. I would have remembered getting threatening letters from my HOA. I checked my mail religiously every day. This had to be some kind of mistake, some administrative error that I could clear up with a phone call. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. A woman answered on the 3rd ring with a voice that could have stripped paint off a barn. Meadowbrook Estates HOA. This is Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda. My name is Franklin Norris. I just found a lien notice on my door, and I think there has been a serious mistake. It says I owe $47,000 for violations I never committed and notices I never received. Address? She asked, her tone suggesting she had better things to do. 2847 Saguaro Lane. I heard typing, then a long pause. No mistake, Mr. Norris. Your account shows multiple violations dating back 23 months. You were sent certified notices at each step of the enforcement process. You ignored them all. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I never received any certified letters. I check my mail every day. There's no way I missed that many notices. Well, according to our records, they were all sent. We have the tracking information. Whether you chose to collect them from the post office or not is not our concern. A cold sensation crept up my spine. What do you mean, collect them from the post office? Certified mail requires a signature, Mr. Norris. If you are not home, the Postal Service leaves a notice and holds the letter for pickup. If you never picked them up, that is your problem, not ours. I never received any pickup notices either. I'm telling you, something is wrong here. Take it up with your postal carrier. Our records show proper notice was given. The lien is valid, and if payment is not received within 30 days, we will proceed with foreclosure. Have a nice day. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, fury and panic competing for dominance in my chest. $47,000. They were going to take my house over fines I never knew existed for violations I never committed. This could not be happening. I spent the rest of that day digging through every piece of paper in my house, searching for anything related to the HOA beyond my regular dues statements, which I had paid without fail. Nothing. Not a single violation notice, not a single certified mail pickup slip. I checked my email, my spam folder, even my trash. The HOA had my email address on file, but there was nothing there either. By evening, I had moved from panic to determination. I would go to the main post office in the morning and speak to someone about these supposedly undelivered certified letters. There had to be a record, a signature log, something that would prove I never received them. Then I would take that proof to the HOA board and demand they remove the lien. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number, $47,000. I had some savings from my military disability payments, maybe $15,000 if I emptied everything, but that would leave me broke and still owing more than half. The house was my only real asset, the only stable thing I had managed to build after the chaos of war and the difficulty of readjusting to civilian life. The thought of losing it made my stomach churn. The next morning, I was at the main Scottsdale post office when the doors opened at 8. I waited in line behind 3 other people, practicing what I would say, trying to keep my anger in check. When I finally reached the counter, a middle-aged postal worker with graying hair and kind eyes greeted me. "How can I help you today?" I pulled out the HOA notice and smoothed it on the counter. "I need to look into certified mail records for my address. According to this, multiple certified letters were sent to me over the past 2 years, but I never received any of them or any pickup notices." She looked at the document, then at me with obvious sympathy. "HOA trouble." "You could say that. They are trying to foreclose on my house for violations I did not know about because I supposedly never picked up their letters." She frowned and pulled the paper closer, examining the tracking numbers. "Let me look into this. What is your address?" 2847 Saguaro Lane. She disappeared into a back office for nearly 20 minutes while I stood at the counter, earning annoyed looks from the growing line behind me. When she returned, her expression was troubled. "Mr. Norris, this is unusual. According to our system, all of these certified letters were signed for and collected." My heart stopped. That's impossible. I never signed for anything. "I'm looking at the signatures right here in the system. Someone signed for these letters." She turned her monitor so I could see. The screen showed a list of tracking numbers with corresponding signature images. I leaned forward, squinting at the digital signatures. None of them were mine. The signatures were obviously forged, crude attempts that did not even come close to matching my actual signature. Some just had random scribbles. A couple had what looked like F. Norris written in handwriting completely different from my own. "Those are not my signatures," I said, my voice rising. "Look, here is my driver's license. You can compare the signature." She looked at my license, then back at the screen, and her frown deepened. "You are right. These do not match at all. Mr. Norris, I think someone may have been intercepting your mail." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Can you tell who signed for them? Is there any way to find out?" "The signatures are supposed to be verified at the time of delivery, but honestly, carriers get busy. And if someone answers the door and says they are authorized to sign for the resident, sometimes corners get cut. Do you live alone?" "Yes. No one else is authorized to receive my mail." She printed out copies of the signature records and handed them to me. "You should file a police report. Mail theft is a federal crime. I will also make a note in our system that there is a suspected mail interception issue at your address." I left the post office with the printouts clutched in my hand, my mind racing. Someone had been deliberately intercepting my certified mail from the HOA. But who and why? I drove home in a daze, pulling into my driveway and sitting in my truck for several minutes, staring at the house next door. My neighbor on the left was Gregory Eaton, a man I had spoken to maybe 3 times in the entire time I had lived here. He kept to himself, and I did the same. On my right lived Judge Harold Morrison and his wife Patricia. I knew Judge Morrison was a judge only because of the Maricopa County bumper sticker on his black Mercedes, and because another neighbor had mentioned it in passing during a conversation about the neighborhood. We had exchanged polite waves and brief hellos, but nothing more. Could one of them have taken my mail? The thought seemed absurd. Why would a judge steal my mail? What possible motive could he have? I went inside and called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line. After explaining the situation, they sent an officer to my house that afternoon. Officer Martinez was a young cop, maybe late 20s, who listened patiently as I explained the whole situation. The lien, the supposed certified letters, the forged signatures. Do you have any idea who might have taken your mail? He asked, taking notes. No, I live alone. I've not had any conflicts with anyone in the neighborhood. This completely blindsided me. Any security cameras on your property? I shook my head. No, I've been thinking about installing some, but I had not gotten around to it. What about your neighbors? Anyone have cameras pointed toward your front door or mailbox? I do not know. I can ask. Officer Martinez took copies of all my documents, the lien notice, the signature printouts from the post office, my own signature samples. I will file a report for mail theft. That is a federal offense, so I will also contact the postal inspectors. They will want to investigate. In the meantime, you should contact an attorney about this HOA situation. Even if someone stole your mail, you will need legal help to fight that lien. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and Googled attorneys in Scottsdale who handled HOA disputes. The search results were depressing. Nearly every attorney's website had a section about how difficult HOA cases were, how much power HOAs had under Arizona law, how expensive the legal battles could become. I called 5 different offices. 3 did not call back. 1 quoted me a $10,000 retainer just to start. The 5th, a solo practitioner named David Chen, agreed to meet with me the next day for a consultation. That evening, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I walked around my neighborhood looking for security cameras. The house across the street had a Ring doorbell that might have captured someone approaching my mailbox. I knocked on their door, and a woman in her 50s answered. Hi, I'm Franklin Norris from across the street. I'm dealing with a mail theft issue, and I was wondering if your doorbell camera might have caught anything. She introduced herself as Linda and listened to my abbreviated explanation. Oh, that is terrible. Yes, I can check the footage. When did this happen? Over the past 2 years, multiple times. The most recent would have been about 6 months ago, according to the HOA's records. Her face fell. The camera only keeps footage for 60 days unless I specifically save it. I'm sorry. Anything older than that is gone. I thanked her anyway and continued my walk. Judge Morrison's house had cameras, I noticed, one pointed at his own front door and another covering his driveway. But none seemed angled toward my property. I considered asking him to check his footage, but something stopped me. I could not articulate why, just a vague unease. The next day, I met with David Chen in his small office in downtown Scottsdale. He was a man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out everything. The lien, the forged signatures, the police report, all of it. He listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. Mr. Norris, I will be straight with you. This is bad. Arizona law gives HOAs tremendous power to enforce their covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Once a lien is filed, it attaches to your property. Even if the underlying violations are disputed, removing a lien requires going through the legal system, which takes time and money. But they sent notices I never received. Someone stole my mail and forged my signature. That has to count for something. It should, absolutely. But here's the problem. The HOA will argue they fulfilled their duty by sending the notices via certified mail. What happened to those notices after they left the HOA's control is not their responsibility, they will claim. The forged signatures complicate things because it proves someone signed for them, which gives the appearance that proper notice was delivered. So I am just screwed? Not necessarily. We can fight this. We will need to prove that you never received actual notice, that the HOA knew or should have known you were not receiving the notices, and that the violations themselves are either false or improperly assessed. The mail theft angle is important, especially if the postal inspectors can identify who intercepted your mail. But I will be honest with you, this is going to be expensive and time-consuming. How expensive? To properly fight this, we are talking about filing a lawsuit to remove the lien, which means discovery, depositions, potentially going to trial. You are looking at $20,000 to $30,000 minimum, possibly more if it goes all the way to trial. I felt the blood drain from my face. I do not have that kind of money. Then your other option is to try to negotiate with the HOA board. See if they will settle for a smaller amount or set up a payment plan. But given that they have already filed a lien and are threatening foreclosure, they are not feeling particularly generous. What if I just ignore it? What if I refuse to pay? They will foreclose on your house, Mr. Norris. It takes time, usually several months, but they can absolutely do it. You will lose your home, and any equity you have in it will go toward paying off the lien and foreclosure costs. Whatever is left, if anything, comes back to you. I left David Chen's office feeling hollower than I had felt since coming home from Afghanistan. The system was rigged against me. I had done nothing wrong, yet I was facing financial ruin. Over the next week, I tried everything I could think of. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board disputing the violations in the lien, explaining about the mail theft. I received no response. I showed up at the HOA management company's office and demanded to speak to someone in charge. The receptionist told me the board president would contact me. No one did. I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA licensing. They sent me a form letter saying they would investigate, but that the process could take several months. The 30-day deadline was approaching, and I was no closer to a resolution. I was drowning in bureaucratic quicksand, and every move I made seemed to pull me down deeper. Then, on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after I had found the lien notice, I was mowing my front lawn when Judge Morrison emerged from his house to get his mail. We made eye contact, and he waved. Something made me turn off the mower and walk over to the property line. "Morning, Judge Morrison," I called out. He smiled warmly. "Please call me Harold. We are neighbors after all. How are you doing?" "Honestly? Not great. I'm having some serious trouble with the HOA. His expression shifted to one of concern. "Oh no, what kind of trouble?" I gave him the condensed version, leaving out the mail theft details, but explaining about the lien and the violations I never knew about. He listened with genuine interest, nodding occasionally. "That is awful, Franklin. HOAs can be so overzealous sometimes. Have you spoken to an attorney?" "I consulted with one, but the legal costs are beyond what I can afford. I am trying to fight it on my own, but the HOA is not responding to me." Harold frowned. "Who is the board president?" "A woman named Brenda Whitmore." He nodded knowingly. "Brenda, yes, she has a reputation for being rather aggressive with enforcement. Look, I cannot get directly involved because of my position, but I can tell you this: document everything, every interaction, every letter, every phone call. If this ends up in court, you will need that paper trail. And do not give up. Sometimes HOAs back down when they realize a homeowner is serious about fighting." "Thanks, Harold. I appreciate the advice. Of course, we are neighbors. If you need someone to talk to, or if you have general legal questions, feel free to knock on my door. I cannot represent you officially, but I'm happy to point you in the right direction." I thanked him again and returned to my lawn, feeling slightly better. At least someone in this neighborhood seemed to be on my side. That evening, I decided to dig deeper into the HOA itself. I pulled up the public records for Meadowbrook Estates and started researching the board members. Brenda Whitmore was indeed the president. The vice president was a man named Thomas Kellerman. The secretary was listed as Patricia Morrison. Patricia Morrison, Judge Harold Morrison's wife. A chill ran down my spine. The wife of my helpful neighbor was on the HOA board that was trying to foreclose on my house. Was that just a coincidence? Had Harold known and deliberately not mentioned it when we spoke? I kept digging. Public meeting minutes were posted on the HOA website, and I downloaded every file from the past 3 years. Reading through them was tedious work, but I forced myself to focus. The violations against me were mentioned repeatedly, starting about 2 years ago. The board had voted to levy the initial fines. They had voted to send the violation notices. They had voted to increase the fines when I supposedly failed to respond. They had voted to file the lien. Patricia Morrison had been present and voting yes at every single one of those meetings. My hands were shaking as I continued reading. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. 6 months before my first alleged violation, there was a discussion in the meeting minutes about problematic homeowners and strategies for enforcement. Brenda Whitmore had proposed implementing a more aggressive fine structure with steeper penalties for non-compliance. Patricia Morrison had seconded the motion. It had passed unanimously. The next mention of my property came just 2 months later. I needed to know more about Patricia Morrison. I searched for her name online and found very little. She had a LinkedIn profile that listed her as a homemaker and community volunteer. Her Facebook was locked down. But I found one interesting detail. She served on the board of directors for a local property management company called Prestige Property Services. I looked up Prestige Property Services. They managed 12 HOA communities in the Scottsdale area, including Meadowbrook Estates. Patricia Morrison was not just on the HOA board. She had financial ties to the company that managed the HOA. Was that even legal? I called David Chen first thing Monday morning and told him what I had found. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Mr. Norris, that is a serious conflict of interest. If Patricia Morrison is on the board of both the HOA and the management company, and she is voting to impose fines that generate revenue for the management company, that could constitute self-dealing. It might even be illegal under Arizona HOA law. What do we do with this information? We use it. This changes things. This gives us leverage. I need to do some research into the specific statutes, but you may have grounds for a lawsuit not just to remove the lien, but to challenge the entire fine structure and possibly seek damages against the board members personally. How much would that cost? Let me make some calls. With this new information, I might be able to take this on a contingency basis, meaning I only get paid if we win. Give me a couple of days to investigate, and I will get back to you." I hung up feeling something I had not felt in weeks. Hope. But that hope was short-lived. The next morning, I found a new notice taped to my door. The HOA was scheduling a foreclosure sale of my property in 45 days. They had accelerated the timeline. I immediately called David Chen. He was furious. "They cannot do this. You are still within the dispute period. This is harassment." "What can we do to stop it?" "File an injunction. We need to get a court order halting the foreclosure until your claims can be heard. I will draft the paperwork today and file it tomorrow. But Franklin, you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly." He was right. Over the next 3 days, I was served with legal papers at my home no fewer than 3 times. The HOA was fighting back hard, claiming I was a delinquent homeowner trying to avoid my legal obligations. They filed a motion to dismiss my claims before David had even finished preparing his full case. Then, on Friday evening, I was in my garage organizing tools when I heard voices outside. I walked to the front of my house and saw Judge Harold Morrison standing on his front lawn, talking with Brenda Whitmore. She was exactly what I had imagined, a woman in her mid-50s with a severe blonde bob, designer yoga clothes, and an expression like she smelled something rotten. They were looking at my house and talking in low voices. I stepped back behind my garage door, out of sight, but close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. "Getting out of control," Brenda was saying. "Needs to be handled carefully," Harold replied. "Already filed the motion. Should never have let it get this far." My pulse hammered in my ears. Judge Morrison was not just aware of my situation. He was actively discussing it with Brenda Whitmore, the HOA president who was trying to take my house. I waited until they finished talking, and Brenda drove away in her white Lexus. Then I went back inside and immediately called David Chen, even though it was after business hours. He answered on the 4th ring. "David, I just overheard Judge Harold Morrison, my next-door neighbor, talking to the HOA president about my case. He is married to Patricia Morrison, who is on the HOA board. What if this is worse than we thought? What if he is involved?" David was quiet for a moment. Harold Morrison. Judge Harold Morrison from Maricopa County Superior Court? "Yes, you know him?" "I know of him. He handles civil cases, including property disputes." "Franklin, which judge is assigned to your case?" I felt my stomach drop. "I do not know. You filed the injunction yesterday. Has it been assigned yet?" "Let me check." I heard typing on his end, then silence, then, "No, this cannot be happening." "What?" "Your case has been randomly assigned to Judge Harold Morrison." The room spun. My neighbor, the man married to an HOA board member, the man who had just been discussing my situation with the HOA president, was now the judge presiding over my case against that very same HOA. "That is not random," I said. "That cannot be random. Judicial assignments are supposed to be random, but there are ways to game the system if you know what you are doing and when to file. Franklin, we need to file a motion for recusal immediately. Judge Morrison has an obvious conflict of interest." "Will he actually recuse himself?" "He has to. If he does not, it is grounds for appeal and potential misconduct charges. But we need to act fast. I will draft the motion tonight and file it first thing Monday morning." That weekend was the longest of my life. I barely left my house, terrified that Harold Morrison would come over and say something, or worse, that more legal papers would show up. I watched from my window as Harold and Patricia came and went, living their normal lives while mine fell apart. On Monday morning, David filed the motion for recusal, laying out all the conflicts: Patricia Morrison's position on the HOA board, her votes to impose the fines and file the lien, her financial connection to the property management company, and Harold Morrison's conversation with Brenda Whitmore. The motion requested that Judge Morrison immediately recuse himself and that a new judge be assigned. The response came faster than I expected. By Tuesday afternoon, Judge Morrison had issued a written order. He denied the motion for recusal. In his order, he claimed that his wife's position on the HOA board did not create a conflict because he was capable of being impartial. He stated that his brief conversation with Brenda Whitmore was merely a neighborly discussion and had no bearing on his ability to hear the case fairly. He dismissed the property management company connection as irrelevant because Patricia Morrison did not directly profit from the fines. The order concluded by scheduling a hearing on the HOA's motion to dismiss for the following week. I read the order 3 times, each time feeling more incredulous. He was not even trying to hide the bias. He was essentially saying, "Yes, my wife is on the board trying to take your house, but trust me to be fair." David Chen was livid when I called him. "This is outrageous. He should have recused himself immediately. We are going to file an emergency appeal with the Arizona Supreme Court." "But Franklin, I need to be honest with you. This is going to take time. And in the meantime, Morrison is still the judge on your case. We have that hearing next week, and if he rules against us, the foreclosure will proceed." "What are my chances?" "In front of Morrison? Not good. He has already shown his bias by refusing to recuse himself, but we have to try." The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning at the Maricopa County Superior Court. I took the day off from my job at a local warehouse, put on the only suit I owned, and met David outside the courthouse. He had prepared extensive arguments and brought copies of all our evidence: the forged signatures, the conflict of interest documentation, everything. We entered the courtroom, and there was Judge Harold Morrison sitting behind the bench in his black robe, looking every bit the impartial authority figure. When he saw me, there was no flicker of recognition, no acknowledgement that we were neighbors. He was all business. Brenda Whitmore was there with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Richard Vaughn. He looked like he had never lost a case in his life. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. "We are here on the matter of Norris versus Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The HOA has filed a motion to dismiss Mr. Norris's claims and to allow the foreclosure to proceed. Mr. Chen, you are representing Mr. Norris." David stood. "Yes, Your Honor, and I would like to renew my motion for Your Honor to recuse yourself from this case due to the conflicts of interest we have outlined." Morrison's expression hardened. "Motion denied. I have already ruled on that issue. Let us proceed with the matter at hand." David began presenting our case, explaining the mail theft, the forged signatures, the conflicts of interest on the HOA board. He was articulate and passionate, making every point clearly. I watched Morrison's face, hoping to see some sign that the arguments were landing, but his expression remained neutral and cold. Then Richard Vaughn stood to respond, and I realized we were in trouble. He dismissed the mail theft as an unfortunate situation, but not the responsibility of the HOA. He argued that the HOA had fulfilled its legal obligations by sending certified notices, and that what happened after was beyond their control. He claimed the violations were legitimate and well documented, with photographic evidence that he presented to the court. I looked at the photos he was showing. They were pictures of my house, but the violations he claimed they showed were ridiculous. One photo showed my garbage bins visible from the street, taken on collection day when everyone's bins were out. Another showed a tiny brown patch in my lawn, maybe 6 inches square, labeled as failure to maintain landscaping. Another showed my truck in my driveway, clearly taken during the 5 minutes it took me to unload groceries before pulling it into the garage. David objected to each photo, pointing out the absurdity of the claimed violations, but Morrison overruled him every time. The hearing lasted 90 minutes. At the end, Morrison announced that he would take the matter under advisement and issue a written ruling within 7 days. We left the courtroom in silence. Once we were outside, David turned to me with a grim expression. "He is going to rule against us. I could tell from his body language, his questions, everything. He has already made up his mind." So what do? We wait for his ruling, then we immediately appeal. We also push forward with the emergency petition to the state Supreme Court regarding his refusal to recuse himself. But Franklin, you need to understand, appeals take months, sometimes years, and in the meantime, unless we can get a stay of the foreclosure, they can proceed with taking your house. There has to be something else we can do. David hesitated, then said quietly, "There is one other option. Go to the media, make this public. Judges hate bad publicity, especially when it involves obvious conflicts of interest. If you can get a reporter interested in this story, it might pressure Morrison to recuse himself or pressure the HOA to back off." I had not considered that angle. "You think that would work?" "It is a gamble. It might make things worse. But at this point, what do you have to lose?" That evening, I drafted a detailed email explaining my situation and sent it to every local news outlet in Phoenix and Scottsdale. I sent it to newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, anyone with a platform. I titled it, "Judge Presiding Over HOA Case While His Wife Sits on the HOA Board." For 2 days, I heard nothing. I began to think the media was not interested, that my story was not dramatic enough to warrant coverage. Then, on Sunday evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a Phoenix area code I did not recognize. "Mr. Norris, this is Bethany Edwards from Channel 12 News. I received your email about your situation with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and Judge Morrison. I would like to discuss this with you. Are you available to talk?" Bethany Edwards turned out to be an investigative reporter who specialized in consumer protection stories. We talked for nearly an hour that evening, and I sent her copies of all my documentation, the lien notice, the forged signatures, the proof of Patricia Morrison's conflicts of interest, the order where Judge Morrison refused to recuse himself, everything. "This is a great story, Mr. Norris," she said when I had finished explaining everything. "Clear conflict of interest, potential corruption, a veteran losing his home to a predatory HOA. This is exactly the kind of thing our viewers care about. I want to run this, but I need to do my own investigation first to verify everything. Can you give me a few days? The judge is supposed to issue his ruling by this Friday. If he rules against me, the foreclosure can proceed." "Then I need to work fast. Let me make some calls. I will be in touch." True to her word, Bethany worked quickly. Over the next 3 days, she called me twice with follow-up questions. She told me she had spoken to David Chen, to the postal inspector handling my mail theft case, and even to some of my neighbors. She had tried to reach Brenda Whitmore and the HOA's attorney, but they had declined to comment. She had also reached out to Judge Morrison's office for a statement. He had not responded. On Thursday evening, the day before Judge Morrison was supposed to issue his ruling, Bethany's story aired on the Channel 12 Evening News. I watched it from my living room, barely breathing. The segment was 7 minutes long, and it was devastating. Bethany had done her homework. She laid out the entire situation clearly and sympathetically, showing photos of my house, of the forged signatures, of the lien notice. She explained Patricia Morrison's position on the HOA board and her connection to the property management company. She showed the meeting minutes where Patricia had voted to impose the fines against me. Then came the bombshell. Bethany had obtained financial records for Prestige Property Services, the management company. Patricia Morrison was not just on their board of directors, she owned 18% of the company. Every fine the HOA imposed generated revenue for the management company through administrative fees and legal costs. Patricia Morrison was directly profiting from the fines levied against homeowners, including me. The segment ended with Bethany standing in front of the courthouse. Judge Harold Morrison has refused to recuse himself from this case, despite his wife's obvious financial interest in the outcome. Mr. Norris faces losing his home, while the judge's wife stands to profit. We will continue to follow this story and demand answers. If you have had similar experiences with your HOA, we want to hear from you. My phone started ringing within minutes of the broadcast ending. Friends I had not spoken to in years called to say they had seen the story. Neighbors knocked on my door to offer support. My email inbox filled with messages from strangers sharing their own HOA horror stories. But the most important call came at 8:30 that evening. It was David Chen, and he sounded excited. "Franklin, turn on your computer and check the Arizona Supreme Court website. They just issued an emergency order." I rushed to my laptop and pulled up the website. There it was, a one-page order in my case, issued less than 2 hours after the news story aired. The Supreme Court had granted my petition. Judge Harold Morrison was ordered to immediately recuse himself from my case, and a new judge would be assigned within 48 hours. Furthermore, all proceedings were stayed until the new judge could review the matter. The foreclosure was halted. I actually shouted in triumph, alone in my house, overcome with relief. For the first time in a month, I felt like I could breathe. The fallout from the news story was swift and severe. The next morning, the Arizona Republic ran a front-page article about the case, expanding on Bethany Edwards' reporting and raising questions about other cases Judge Morrison had handled where his wife might have had a financial interest. The Arizona Commission on Judicial Conduct announced they were opening an investigation into Morrison's conduct. By Monday, Patricia Morrison had resigned from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. Brenda Whitmore released a statement saying the board would review my case. Judge Morrison issued a terse statement saying he had acted in good faith, but would cooperate fully with the Commission's investigation. My new judge was assigned on Tuesday, Judge Martha Rodriguez, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for fairness. David Chen immediately filed a renewed motion to dismiss the lien and to sanction the HOA for their conduct. The HOA, suddenly facing intense scrutiny and public backlash, changed their tune completely. Richard Vaughn called David Chen and asked if we would be willing to discuss a settlement. The settlement negotiations took 2 weeks. David was merciless, and I loved him for it. He demanded not just the removal of the lien, but a full investigation into how the violations had been assessed, a refund of any improper fines, and payment of my legal fees. The HOA tried to lowball us at first, offering to remove the lien if I would pay a nominal $10,000 and waive any claims against them. David laughed in their faces and countered with a demand for $50,000 in damages for the emotional distress and harassment I had suffered, plus legal fees, plus a formal apology. They eventually settled for $35,000, removal of the lien, expungement of all violations from my property records, and a written apology signed by Brenda Whitmore. The HOA also agreed to implement new policies requiring board members to disclose any financial conflicts of interest and to prohibit board members from voting on matters where they had a financial stake. When I received the settlement check, I actually cried. It was not just about the money, although that certainly helped replenish my depleted savings. It was about vindication, about the system finally working the way it was supposed to, about not being crushed by people who abused their power. But I was not done yet. The postal inspectors had continued their investigation into the mail theft, and in late May, they made an arrest. It was Gregory Eaton, my neighbor on the other side, the man I had barely spoken to in nearly 4 years. Turns out, Gregory had a drug problem and mounting debts. Brenda Whitmore had paid him $500 for each certified letter he intercepted from my mailbox and signed for using forged signatures. He would wait until the postal carrier attempted delivery, take the notice slip before I could see it, and then go to the post office to collect the certified letters himself. The postal workers had not verified his identity carefully because he gave my address and claimed to be authorized to pick up mail for me. Gregory had kept copies of the letters, probably as insurance in case Brenda tried to betray him. When the postal inspectors searched his house, they found all of them in a filing cabinet in his garage. Gregory was charged with mail theft, identity fraud, and conspiracy. Brenda Whitmore was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and several HOA-specific violations under Arizona law. Patricia Morrison was charged with conflict of interest violations and self-dealing. Judge Harold Morrison was not criminally charged, but the Judicial Commission forced him to resign from the bench in disgrace. The trials took place over the following 6 months. I testified at each one, describing what I had gone through, the fear of losing my home, the helplessness of fighting a rigged system. Gregory took a plea deal and got 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. Brenda was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Patricia Morrison was convicted on the civil charges and ordered to pay a substantial fine, though she avoided jail time. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA underwent a complete overhaul. Brenda's entire board was voted out by the homeowners, who had finally woken up to how corrupt things had become. The new board hired a different management company, implemented transparent processes for violations and fines, and actually started working to improve the neighborhood instead of terrorizing the people who lived there. As for me, I still live at 2847 Saguaro Lane. My lawn is still immaculate, my house still the same beige it has always been, my truck still parked in my garage every night. I installed security cameras covering every angle of my property, and I check my mail obsessively every single day. I will probably never fully trust an HOA again, but at least I know what to watch for now. Judge Harold Morrison sold his house and moved out of state, somewhere back east according to the neighbors. Patricia went with him. Their house sat empty for a few months before a young couple with 2 kids bought it. They are nice people, and we wave to each other regularly. Gregory Eaton also moved right after his trial ended. Good riddance. On the anniversary of the day I found that lien notice on my door, I threw a barbecue in my backyard and invited David Chen and Bethany Edwards, along with a bunch of my neighbors. We grilled steaks, drank beer, and celebrated the fact that sometimes, if you fight hard enough and get a little lucky, justice actually prevails. David raised his beer and made a toast. To Franklin, who took on a corrupt HOA, a crooked judge and a rigged system, and won. Everyone cheered, and I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. I had been through hell, nearly lost everything, but I had survived. More than that, I had won. Bethany pulled me aside later in the evening. You know, your story had an impact beyond just your own case. We have gotten dozens of tips from homeowners about HOA abuses. Some of them are being investigated. You opened a door, Franklin. I just wanted to keep my house. I know, but you did more than that. You reminded people that they do not have to accept corruption and abuse of power. Sometimes fighting back actually works. As the sun set over Scottsdale that evening, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, I stood in my backyard with a cold beer in my hand, surrounded by friends and neighbors, and reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the anger, the hopelessness, but also the determination, the small victories, and ultimately the triumph. I had learned that home is not just a place you own. It is something worth fighting for, worth defending against those who would take it from you through greed or malice or abuse of power. I had learned that the system, as broken as it sometimes seems, can still work if you push hard enough and refuse to give up. And I had learned that neighbors, real neighbors, are not the people who happen to live next door. They are the people who stand with you when everything falls apart. My house at 2847 Saguaro Lane was more than just property now. It was a symbol of resilience, of justice, of one man standing up against overwhelming odds and refusing to be crushed. Every time I pulled into my driveway, every time I unlocked my front door, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA would never threaten me again. Judge Morrison would never abuse his position again. Brenda Whitmore was sitting in a federal prison cell, contemplating her choices. And I was home, exactly where I belonged, with my freedom, my dignity, and my property intact. Some battles are worth fighting, no matter how impossible they seem. This had been one of them, and I had won.